Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you with us today and to have Tom Roy with the town of Simsbury. Tom is the Director of Public Works for the town of Simsbury, and he and his staff and the residents have come together to do some really interesting projects and interesting things throughout the town. So I'm going to pass it along to Tom so that he can share his story with us, and hopefully we can walk away with some really cool ideas to try in our own towns. Tom?
All right, well, thank you, everybody, and welcome. I think, like so many of us, we've had kind of our own unique approach in Simsbury, being a smaller town, in how we do that. Can everybody see the full screen, or is it showing only part of the screen?
We're showing, we're seeing the full PowerPoint software. So we're seeing the slide and then the side.
Okay, let me just try one more time, see if we can get it right, so we can make it an easier day today for everybody. Okay, are we getting the full screen now?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So just real quick as we get started, a little bit about Simsbury. We're about 25,000 residents. Oh, look at that. I don't think it's advancing for some reason. Do you see a Simsbury slide, or is this still the opening slide?
Just the opening slide.
Okay. Try one more trick on this. See if, I think we're just going to have to go with it being with the. We try one more time this way. Okay. Okay. Sorry about the technical difficulties today. Okay, I think we're just going to go kind of, it's not quite as pretty as if it was full screen, but I think that might be the easiest way to go forward. But Simsbury is about a population of about 25,000 people, 7,500 residential homes, 191 roadway miles. And what's interesting is all of that's in a little bit of a larger area of just under 35 square miles. Very much a rural community. The town is about 1/3 preserved open space, either preserved farmland or just natural forest lands preserved. Very engaged residents. The people who live here are very proud to live here. Most of the phone calls that come into my office start with a qualifier. I've lived in town for X number of years, or I'm second or third generation. The people who live here tend to stay here a long time and really do care. A lot of older farm to market roads. And we also have a lot of topography that makes some of our roadways certainly not the grid system that you would see in some of the smaller cities we have. We have East Coast Greenway running north-south through town, something, again, we take a lot of pride in, and it brings a lot of bikers, walkers, runners, joggers to town, and that's part of where we kind of lead into complete streets. We are currently a silver bike-friendly community, a lot of work by a lot of our town staff and volunteers to make that happen, something I think that everybody's very proud of. And really, it's the biking that got us started down the complete streets path. In 2009, we started working towards our bicycle-friendly designation. We added sharrows and signage to many of our roadways. We worked on our existing trail network. We created a bike share program. It used to be you could come to Simsbury and you could go to a couple of different locations and actually borrow a bike for free, just in case you didn't have one. And the town was kind of instrumental in getting that started. In 2010, we ended up receiving that bicycle-friendly community designation as bronze level. And then later in 2014, that was increased to a silver level. And I believe we're the first in the state to be a silver level. From that kind of leveraged us into developing in 2018 our pedestrian and bicycle master plan. We worked with Fitzgerald and Halliday on that. Big part of that was trying to make the connection between our bicycle advocates and our town leadership to really kind of try to lay out a plan that we could implement over time and follow. The other part about that is we had a huge outreach program. We were at the fairs, and we were at the shopping center, and we were really doing our best to put out surveys to the general public to make sure everybody was involved so that we truly were listening to a larger group of our citizens. In doing so, we actually heard some things that I was surprised about. Really, there was a strong push for walkability and sidewalks. I was surprised that in a relatively rural community that people would want so many sidewalks, but a lot of people felt that's what it would take to really make them comfortable. And safer streets was really what kind of led out of that. From that, we actually went on and worked with Beta Group in 2019. We conducted a sidewalk and curb ramp assessment plan. That actually led to about a $200,000 annual sidewalk improvement plan. Our first goal is actually to replace our existing aged and deteriorated sidewalks. Looking at that picture there, nobody wants to come outside and deal with that sidewalk every day. Shoveling sidewalks like that are terrible. It's a trip hazard. And we had a number of sidewalks that were in poor condition. So we've been putting in about $200,000 a year to rehabilitate our existing sidewalks. With that, we've also been working on finding a few locations where we are removing sidewalks. And one of the standards that we've used is if we have a sidewalk on a cul-de-sac with no other streets coming off of it, and it's in bad condition, is it really worth replacing? Or can we simply say a small residential street like that really should be safe to walk in the roadway? Not easy with removing sidewalks. There's always that one resident who's going to tell you they moved to the neighborhood because of the sidewalk. But working with residents, we've been able to do that in a few locations. Our goal with our sidewalk program is that within 15 years, we'll have full ADA compliance with all of our ramps. Right now, we're on schedule, and we may actually be slightly ahead of schedule on that. So it's been going well, fingers crossed. In 2019, again, kind of leveraging grants, we applied for the CROG Active Transportation Grant for a traffic calming demonstration project. Our goal at the time was to investigate traffic calming on David Drive, residential street, 25-mile-an-hour posted speed limit, but it serves as a cut through for traffic that's kind of heading in an east-west direction over between Bushy Hill Road and Hot Meadow Street in town. As all these things are, why David Drive? There was a specific incident where they were having a block party, had the roadway closed off with barricades, and on a Saturday afternoon, a car came over with such enthusiasm that they actually skidded and hit one of the barricades. And to have that happen in front of the whole neighborhood, kids in the street, really led to a level of, I'll just say, increased awareness of the concerns on David Drive. So we targeted that with that grant project. And as so many of us found out, COVID ruined all of our plans. We felt that during COVID, with the decrease in traffic and the fact that we didn't have a lot of people who were going to be engaged, we ended up putting that on hold for the summer of 2020. And we basically went to Plan B. We have an intersection, Notch and West Mountain Road in West Simsbury, where we had a resident that began contacting the police about speeding on Notch Road. Specifically, the gentleman had a daughter that was 15, about to turn 16. He was in the military, about to go on deployment. He was concerned that, here she was, a young driver, and was going to have to pull out onto this virtual highway, as it was often described. The configuration of the road, it's just a high volume area. It's a connector between Simsbury and Avon and Canton area. So everybody getting out to the shops in Route 44 use this area heavily. It was a long-standing issue, but based upon kind of this very active and very engaged resident, it ended up kind of moving its way up the queue. It may not have been the intersection we saw as the highest profile, but this resident did all the right things in terms of getting other neighbors involved and really working hard to kind of put some pressure on our local political leadership. This is an aerial, just giving you a quick rundown of the intersection. The ADT is just around 1,000 on Notch Road, which is the road that's forking off to the right. And the real issue is vehicles that are traveling from north to south on West Mountain Road. They end up coming off, and it's essentially like a highway off-ramp, and there's no decrease in speed. Although both are posted at 30 miles an hour, the reality is the expectation for the homeowners here is that it should be a much slower speed. Kind of a ground level view, you can see that you no need to hit the brakes in the previous configuration. Plenty of room to make that turn at full speed. Just a different angle. You can see we have a lot of asphalt, or we had, past tense, a lot of asphalt in this intersection. Quickly by the numbers, ADT, like I said, just under 1,000. The average speed before we did any traffic calming was just over 40 miles an hour. The 85th percentile, 45. But the real concern is the fastest driver through that section was 75 miles an hour. Pretty intense. And I think as we go through, you'll see what we've seen is a lot of our problems are not necessarily the average speed, but it's that one or two infrequent fastest drivers. I'm sure that's similar to so many other communities. And it's a real challenge to what we can do to help control that. A lot of options. I'm sure, you know, with everybody looking and all of the qualified professionals we have here, there's 10, 15 different options that we could have considered. We started with looking at a roundabout, and we actually worked with some Yukon seniors that did this as their senior design project, and they were actually overseen by Larry Murphy at Jacobs Engineering. Over here, probably should have blown it up, is their configuration, and it ties in Chestnut Street, which comes off of West Mountain, and utilizes an area between these two streets. It's actually a small little parklet area. The concern we had in looking at this is the house right here where the gentleman lives who was so concerned about this and had the teenage driver. I don't think his concerns would have been alleviated with a teenage driver pulling out from their driveway directly into a roundabout. It would have been a true pass-fail test on driver's ed. The other thing is it was a substantially higher cost, and we would have been losing that little parklet, which I think, again, that area of town, the neighborhoods, they value that green space. The second one, and again, we did a lot of very back of the envelope sketches down here at the bottom, was to tee up the intersection and control it with a stop sign. I think that had some real promise, but again, we were cutting into that parklet and creating some less than desirable effects for that region of town. We looked at making Notch Road one way. I think in many ways that was one of the ones that was leading in my original thoughts as a way to solve this. But again, as so many of you dealt with, to tell a resident that if they wanted to go to the north end of town, they were going to have to go right out of their driveway, drive down 1/8 of a mile, take a left, and come back. I think there's a hard time for residents to understand that they're going to have to go south in order to go north. If they couldn't visually see how close the roadway was, I think it would have been far more reasonable. I think in so many subdivisions, that's how people drive normally. But that certainly didn't look like it was going to get any traction with the residents. So the next was just simply to realign the intersection and narrow the approach so that we could slow the cars down as they were coming off of West Mountain Road. Working with, we basically leveraged our grant. We moved our grant through CROG, where the work was being done by FHI. We kind of leveraged that and we brought them over to this intersection. And this was kind of the preliminary concept drawing that they put forward, which included, and we were big proponents of this, having a splitter island, bumping out our curb line. And we had to patch in a little bit of asphalt here to kind of help tee up that intersection. I can also tell you, as a driver coming down Notch Road in the previous configuration, it was very difficult to pull out and to see over your right shoulder. Oftentimes you would end up with the corner of the truck pillar on my pickup truck would block it. It was a difficult one. So we did want to tee this up, and adding that little asphalt did that. We made sure that we could have the appropriate turning radiuses, and generally it was a good test. Before we kind of wanted to try before we buy, and a big part of what this grant was is to utilize temporary measures to see what would work and what wouldn't work. This is actually before it was fully installed. We laid this out. We put in the yellow plastic delineators for the island. You can see here where we patched in that section of asphalt. We actually, for the first week or two, we just had orange traffic cones. We were not too sure how sharp we wanted to make this corner. Always a judgment, you know, we wanted to be tight enough to make sure we saw results, but we also wanted to make sure that we didn't inhibit the flow of truck traffic. And one of the things that, you can never do too often is work with our local professionals. So we actually ran a fire truck through. Nothing better than having a good relationship with the fire chief. We called them up. They sent out their guys. First try, made us feel very comfortable with where we had the settings. And then, same thing, nothing better than knowing folks at the bus company who can come out with a full-size school bus. It also allowed us the ability to have a conversation with both the bus company and the fire department, more importantly, some of the local firemen who work there, to make sure they were comfortable with this. This was truly going to be our first implemented traffic calming measure if it was going to go forward. And in the past, we've had some challenges with our first responders because they have the concern, as is in any community, with how fast are they going to be able to respond if they are, in their terms, zigging and zagging through all of these different configurations. Very good to work with them, great bunch of guys, and it really helped. We worked with our police department, Officer Jamie Ball. He actually wanted to be on the call today, but had a conflict. He was very involved with this with us. And what we were able to do is kind of see a before and after. So with the traffic calming, we actually saw a few less vehicles. It may have just been time of year, or it may be that some people didn't want to make that configuration and they went down to the next intersection. This section of Notch Road is easy to bypass if you don't want to drive down it. We saw the average speed drop by roughly 3 miles an hour. The 85th percentile dropped by 3 miles an hour. And even our fastest car dropped by 3 miles an hour. So long and short, all of this work was for just 3 miles an hour. But, and I cannot stress this enough, the residents loved it. We took it down in November and they were upset when we took it down because we said we have to plow snow and we're not able to plow around these plastic delineators. And they were upset. They wanted to know when it was going to come back up. And once we took it down, I would get almost 1 or 2 emails a month from one of the residents every time they had what they felt was a close call. When are you going to get that back up, Tom? We had another close call. You need to get that back up. Which, it's good to know that it works. It wasn't all rainbows and sunshine. We put our post up on Facebook, and we have a couple of responses that I liked particularly well. To slow down, take your foot off the gas, put on the brake. These are good lessons for all of us. Drivers are way too fast on this turn. And the one I like at the bottom is, now the drivers have to hit the brakes to peel off to the right. A couple of them actually, when we were looking to put these up in the presentation, a couple of the more negative ones were taken down. The one key thing that kept coming up on Facebook, everybody who is not in this industry wants to control speed with stop signs. And we've done a lot of work to try to tell them why the MUTCD doesn't feel that's right. It's a hard lesson for a lot of people to hear and understand.
Quick question for you before we move on from the chat. Prior to the change, did you see motor vehicle accidents? Was there any data collected as far as crashes before, crashes after?
Actually, it's a great question, and it was something I was thinking about just this morning. So whoever asked that question, you're really helping me out with this, because I think a lot of times with suburban and rural communities, we don't necessarily have enough traffic volume that some of these dangerous intersections don't necessarily show themselves with accidents. But being here every day and seeing the situations and seeing where we have cars with near misses, we had a lot of ancillary information about near misses, but we did not have any appreciable crashes at that intersection. So it becomes very difficult as to whether or not that's the best basis in a rural community or suburban community to make your decision. And I don't know if there's a way at some point in the future, maybe do we find a way to track near misses or frequent complaints or the non-serious accidents. I mean, I'm thinking of, we have an intersection in town where we constantly in wintertime have cars sliding off the road. We know, as the people who are out there during the storms, that this is not a good configuration. But when we put in for grants to do a roadway realignment, there's no appreciable crash data. There's no injuries. And I think we need to come up with a better system to account for that, because we want to fix the roads before there's that injury. If you see, 2 cars, 3 cars every winter slide off of that intersection, it's just a matter of time before we're going to have something more serious. So really good question. But based on our big 3 mile an hour improvement, we felt comfortable the design worked, and now we went about making it permanent. We requested $35,000 during the budget process. The residents were great. They sent letters and emails of support. They called their elected officials and they said this matters to them. We had originally considered whether we could have just squeezed this in with year-end savings or fitted in doing it with our own staff, but we really felt that would have been disingenuous to the process. We wanted to have our elected officials say this is important and actually designate some funds to do it. Once the budget passed, we hired BL companies to confirm the final design. FHI had done a great job, but it was a planning level design. We just wanted to make sure everything met with the appropriate curvatures and the geometries, and that we had something that we could actually lay out with a surveyor. They also did a nice job of providing both a rendering and, as you can see in the upper left, a planting plan. We wanted to make this decorative. We wanted to make it as nice as possible. So I went out and I met with the residents. This is actually right there, just to the south of the intersection. This is that little parklet, as we described it. We met couldn't have been a more public works meeting. We're at the back of my pickup trucks and the whole neighborhood came out, and it was a really productive meeting. They were happy with where we were talking about putting the plantings. They were happy with the look. The only real challenge came up with, we had talked about doing granite curb, and we had a hard time sourcing the granite curb this past construction season with all of the challenges and with COVID and the supply chain issues. So it took us an extra probably 2 months to get this done. This is the finished product. We have the granite blocks, we have river stone, we have a couple of small grasses and junipers in here. And then on the other side, we did the same thing with some river stone and junipers. And we did a bituminous Cape Cod style curb on that side. Kind of from the other side, you can see we had to do a little bit of drainage work as we were making these changes to make sure everything would work out. We also, through this process, they brought up the fact that there was not a street light at that intersection. So one of the things that we added was the street light up here. It wasn't part of the original scope, but it was something we could certainly fit in and made sense with making this as visible as possible. For anybody who's ever been in Simsbury, or specifically West Simsbury, it's very dark at night, and we thought this was a good add to the overall project. In terms of timeline, I think we did a really great job. The issue was first brought to our police department in April of 2020. In May of 2020, it became a public works project, not a problem, a project. In July, we had our temporary traffic calming installed, leveraging the grant that we had already had with CROG. In December, we proposed in the budget process to have this included as a project for the upcoming year. In May, the referendum passed, thankfully. July, the funding was available, and in early October, the project was complete. So all in 18 months. I can promise you along the way, some of the residents certainly wanted it to be faster. We made a conscious decision this past summer, so the summer of 21, not to put the temporary measures back up. I thought that if we put the temporary measures back up, we're just taking a little bit of pressure off of ourselves to get the final design done. Early on, we thought we were going to be completed much closer to mid-July than October. But like everything, sometimes construction is a little bit more challenging than we'd like it to be. Why do we do this? We all do this for the same thing. And we had a nice email from Richard Gallagher, who was adjacent to the intersection. And, again, he's thanking Chris, who was the person who initiated the project, and myself. He doesn't thank our team, but it was really our team that went out and did a lot of that work. But it's great when the residents actually see a value in what you did. And always nice to get a few attaboys to make up for some of the less than positive comments on Facebook. Once this one was done, we had made a promise to the folks at David Drive way back, and we figured that traffic had returned to a level that we would be able to see an accurate result. So we went back to David Drive. Again, it's a residential neighborhood, serves as a cut through between 2 major roads in town. Traffic is heaviest during commuting times and with school kids. In terms of configuration, the street begins at the top of a ridge and has a steady downhill slope. So similar to what we had at West Mountain and Notch, the traffic speed concerns is primarily in one direction. So primarily out here, it's east to west. As the cars are going down the hill, I think there's a tendency that they may not realize that they're picking up speed. It's only about 0.4 of a mile. And along that way, we have 3 T intersections that come into David Drive. And similarly, we've looked at multiple configurations. The difference being, instead of just putting these on paper, we actually went out and did a series of trials in different configurations. This Blue Ridge Drive is actually the top. And as you look down, you're sloping downhill through David Drive. Our primary concern was from this corner up to Blue Ridge Drive. And you can see it's not a screaming downhill, but it's a steady downhill the entire way on the straightaway that causes cars to go a little bit faster than they should, just a little bit. By the numbers, again, we're just under 1,000 vehicles per day. Average speed is only 31. 85th percentile, 36. I think most of us would feel comfortable for a 25-mile-an-hour posted road. That's not too far off the mark. But again, we have the one, we're going to say one idiot going 60 miles an hour through a residential street. And these numbers of these 60 and 70-mile-an-hour drivers, I think, are the ones that really scare residents. These are the ones that it's a tragedy waiting to happen. So we wanted to see what we could do. We looked at, this shows 4. We ended up looking at 3 different configurations. Again, we were working with the folks from FHI to provide us a level of guidance in what we were doing. We walked this street several times with myself, our engineering staff, our police department, and our planning department. So, what's going to work? And up at the top, we started with a curb extension. The existing, you can kind of just see it here. This is the edge of the road. In both directions at this intersection with David and Blue Ridge, it's a very, very wide intersection. So again, as cars are cutting through, they're allowed to make this turn at 25, 30 miles an hour if they want. That's starting off at a high rate of speed at the top of the hill at the beginning of the straightaway. And we believe that was leading to some of the higher numbers of speed as they worked their way down. Again, with our plastic delineator post, you can see we bumped out the intersection quite substantially to tighten up that radius and make it a little bit more difficult of a turning movement. Similar to what we did at Notch Road, we had our fire department and our school bus company show up to look at this area with us. After we had put in the delineators, we actually had to move a couple to give them the level of comfort they needed. Specifically, the school buses doing a right turn out of this intersection did not want to cross the center line. Again, we worked with them, very reasonable, kept it as a tight turning radius, but something that would be manageable by the school bus drivers. The second one we did was, and originally we talked about doing 2 of these. We ended up just doing 1, call it a neighborhood traffic circle. We could have called it a roundabout. It's not truly a roundabout. But basically we bumped out the lane. We put in a small traffic circle, again, to slow down cars coming through and causing them to do that little left to right movement, something to change the driver behavior. This was probably our least popular option. I think drivers had a hard time understanding how that was helping them, how that was going to slow things down. We did a couple of splitter islands with road narrowing at the same time. This was probably the one that I think had the most success. And in part, it was because we decided to dress it up. And with the fall season, we put a bunch of these mums out there. Nothing you can't improve on with a little bit of flowers. And the guys did a nice job. We had these planters. We put yellow reflectivity on the center ones, white reflectivity on the edge ones. And all of these actually made their way back to my shop yesterday. One of the containers was hit, but generally they made it much better. And again, that little bit of plants really seemed to help the comments that we were getting on Facebook and elsewhere. This one really did get a lot of attention on Facebook. I don't know why. It was much more hotly contested. And we're still waiting on the results for our survey. Right now, if you lived in town, you could actually complete an online survey. And we're asking the people who both live in the neighborhood and drive in the intersection, what do you think? Which ones worked and which one didn't work? And again, part of this may be to show that all of this didn't change driver behavior, or maybe all it did is reduce that 60 mile an hour down to 50 mile an hour. But we really need to step back and not just look for the numerical data, but also how did residents feel? How did they see and perceive these changes? So a couple people on Facebook, it's great to see the roundabouts. I know it's more of a traffic circle than a roundabout. So my friend Steven seemed to think it was great. This one down here on the left was threatening that if anyone knows who owns some sort of car, always seems to be running late, I'm looking for you. It's a tough neighborhood. Same thing, we all work with the public, and a couple of these are interesting. The one on the right with a nice email to me telling me to remove it. He appreciates the effort, but remove it. It's absurd, and this measure is absolutely ridiculous. Clearly, the narrowing at the intersection of David and Blue Ridge was one that the majority of the residents didn't understand how changing the behavior at the beginning of the road may affect the speed as they would make their way down the roadway. This one here, we got highlighted. A number of the residents have begun taking measures into their own hands. They're following cars. They're setting up radar guns. Shocking. I don't know where a resident gets a hold of a radar gun. Talking about verbal altercations, people standing in the road, not stuff that we really want to see in Simsbury or any other town. So I think these certainly indicate to me that there was a need to do this here. The biggest complaints that we saw on Facebook were people were upset. Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to slow me down? We had a lot of phone calls about, how dare you try to slow me down? I'm getting to work. I'm getting to shopping. I have places to go. And I think it comes down to people not necessarily recognizing and appreciating that they may be in a rush, but they're driving through somebody's neighborhood. They're driving in front of somebody's house, and they're driving where somebody's kids are hopefully playing out in the front yard. So certainly a challenge. Kind of just to wrap it all up, I see there's a number of questions, but in summary, I think these small projects really do matter to residents. They don't matter to the whole town, but to that neighborhood, this is a big deal. And it was really great. As much as at times they drove me crazy on Notch Road, they cared and they were involved. And I think that's the most that we can hope for as public works professionals. Traffic calming is not always popular. It's not understood. I think as much as we're trying to get the word out on Facebook, it's still relatively new to most folks, and there's a hard time understanding how this is going to help. So I found Facebook to not be the most productive. Taking the phone calls myself seemed to be the best. When I had the chance to go out into the neighborhood, even as we were standing there laying out some of these things, taking 2 or 3 minutes to talk to people, it was a much different relationship than when it was on Facebook. Surprising, we had a lot of negative comments on Facebook. We would go out there and, one older gentleman stopped and was like, it's about time somebody does something. This is great. I appreciate you doing all this. We needed this. So I like to say working with residents is fun. You don't get any good stories if you don't have a couple of bad days. And the perception of what works is just as important as the hard data. If the residents believe this is helping them and making them go slower, and for a relatively small dollar value, we can implement a change, I think we have a responsibility to do that. So with that, I'm sorry we had a couple technical problems, but love to take any questions from anybody. I see a couple up in the chat box. So kind of turn it over to Mary.
Yes, and we're going to get to one of the questions was about your sharrows. You mentioned that you've been using some sharrows on some roads for some time. Do you have any comments or concerns? This is from Hiram Peck about whether the sharrows meet MUTCD standards or not, especially given the high speeds.
Okay, great question, Hiram. When we first put out sharrows, especially back in 2009, it was still relatively new. There was certainly not any suburban communities using sharrows. And MUTCD at the time, I think the recommended spacing was every 400 feet. We were very concerned when we first put them out, and you get the template and it's huge template. And we really thought when we put them down, we were going to be painting over them by the end of the month. We thought residents were going to complain. We went with the reading of the MUTCD literature, and it's an advisory marker. And we felt that it was okay to extend the distance because, again, it was making things safer, and it wasn't necessarily guaranteeing anybody that you were going to have the lane to yourself. And we thought it was making, went with better than what it was. We worked with our police chief as our LTA. And our original spacing was essentially, you saw one, you drove past it, you saw the next one, you drove past it, you saw the next one. So as a driver, it was continually a mention of this is here. The other thing, we had a challenge. Some of our local bike advocates felt they should have been closer to the center of the road. And again, it came down to being a balance of what was most reasonable for, again, a suburban town, and making it as safe as reasonably possible.
Okay, thank you. Another question that actually came up during the registration process. You mentioned that your town has a complete streets resolution. And how is that working for you? And what do you see as the benefits and drawbacks of having this versus a formal policy or ordinance?
I tell you, that's been hotly debated here in Simsbury. And we went with a complete streets resolution made by our Board of Selectmen to say they support complete streets, they're in favor of complete streets. And I think for me, the proof is in the pudding that we've done the pedestrian bicycle master plan. We've done the bicycle friendly community. We have thought of bicycling and pedestrians in all of our projects. Myself, I'm an avid cyclist, I'm an avid runner. Our town engineer has, he has a road bike. We have people who are engaged and care about it. And I think that may be a little bit more important at times than having a hard and fast resolution or ordinance rather that says you must do this, as opposed to people who want to do this.
All right, thank you. Let's see. Oh, you mentioned these projects were kind of spurred by residents getting in touch with your department and having some issues. Do you have other ways of handling street selection for the projects? Are you looking more broadly? Can you talk a little bit more about your plan?
Certainly. For the past 2 years, we've been trying to kind of get a fund available so that we can do some of these intersection, at least concepts for realignments and plans, and have them on the shelf and ready to go. We want to basically have things lined up so that we have a plan that we can follow and implement over time, as opposed to being reactionary to when either there's an accident or a number of residents get into an uproar. We kind of want to make sure as engineers and as public works professionals and the police, we work together to identify the needs. And I think based upon the success of what we've done this year, we're going to see that going forward into at least, it's certainly going to be presented in this year's budget. And I feel fairly comfortable that it's going to be selected. Because as I was saying, we have a number of intersections that we have concerns about. And we want to really make sure that we start putting a dollar value to what would it be to improve this intersection.
Does anyone have any other questions for Tom? Feel free to either unmute yourself or put it in the chat, and I can work that through for you. You'll notice in the chat there are some comments, some conversation going back and forth on MUTCD. Yes, I think that is probably a truth, is that we're still looking a lot at car speed and flow over, looking at the safety of all users when we're looking at MUTCD guidance. But I do agree with Anthony here. It says, unfortunately, the MUTCD prioritizes car speed and flow over safety. We need to keep that in mind and apply engineering judgment, especially when we're working to increase vulnerable user mode share. Good to see that this demo project moved to a permanent installation, and lighting is a great improvement for walking and biking safety at intersections. So good point there. Also some other resources. We want to look a little bit further into things. From Kyle Benjamin. Tom, do you think you will see a larger decrease in speed due to having physical barriers as opposed to the temporary ones on Notch Road?
I tell you what, it's actually a really interesting question. I think the permanent design that you saw is a little less in your face than the bright white and yellow reflective cones. And I think we are definitely going to put the stat tracker out there and try to get some data on that. And I'd be happy to kind of report that back. The other thing that I didn't mention is when we were doing it, we made a very conscious decision that we wanted to do the sloped curbing for both the traffic island and that inner edge. One of the things that was crystal clear after those delineator posts had been up for a few months is there was a lot of contact with vehicles. They had a few little scrapes on them. There was a lot of paint swapping in there from cars that were trying to go through there, maybe at 72. And so we made the slope curving. So in the event that a driver errantly catches the curb, we wanted to make sure that it would be something recoverable and that it was not going to result into an accident. So yeah, I'm really curious to see where we're going to come out now that it's the permanent design.
All right. Any other questions for Tom? All right. Okay. If we don't have any other questions for Tom, I actually wouldn't mind kind of broadening the discussion a little bit and asking you all a few questions while we have you. We, as you know, this is part of the Complete Street Spotlight series, and we're very interested in continuing on with the series, and we have several more in the planning stages. So would love to hear from you on any projects that you would like to hear more about, or any town experiences that you'd like to learn more about, so that we have we can prioritize the content for the upcoming sessions. Also, if there are any specific treatments or countermeasures or topics that you'd like to learn more about, we can chat a little bit about it here, or you can certainly email us. We'll put our email addresses in the chat, and we'll also be creating a web page, which is under development, where we're going to house all the recordings from the spotlights, as well as copies of presentations and any other resources that you would like to see shared. So please reach out and let us know if there's anything from this presentation. Tom has graciously agreed to share this with us, so that will be going up along with the recording from today. But if there are any particular detail sheets or a copy of the ordinance, things like that, we will make sure that we add those to the webpage as well. Tom, I want to thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your experiences with us. We know that running a public works department in a small town can be a challenge, and there's lots of different groups that all have their own priorities, and I appreciate your efforts to try and improve safety in your town and for all users, and thank you very much. Okay. Any other comments before we close things out for today? Yes, Mark, thank you. Public outreach and communicating to our customers. Good. All right. Well, thank you all for your time. Appreciate you being part of things today, and stay tuned. December 15th is our next one. Town of Greenwich is going to be with us, sharing some details about their Elm Street intersection project. So thank you very much, and have a great day.